Bruce. Thanks for the introduction, but I gotta start by complaining about you, because you took away my natural advantage. When I speak and the title Economist comes up, people always assume I'm gonna be boring, dull, they picture Ben Stein from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and their expectations are way down here. And then all I have to do is be mediocre, and I've exceeded those boring economist expectations. Well, now Bob said I have to be funny and engaging and entertain you for an hour, and so you move the expectations up a little bit. So I want you to recalibrate your expectations lower, and I'm going to shoot real high, and it'll be really, really good. All right? So let's start off to get your mind working with a little question, a little math example. So we're going to do some math examples throughout this next hour. A quick math example. If you have a graduated income tax, and I simplified it, $10 is taxed at 2%, $10 to $20 is taxed at 3%, $20 to $30 is taxed at 4%, and then we have 5% bracket. If person A makes $25, what do they pay in income tax? Just keep your brain working. They make $25, what do they pay in income tax? How much?
$5.
$5? Other thoughts? $7? $1? 70 cents? Who's in the $1? $1? How'd you get to $1? 4% of $25, right? You make $25, you throw it in that bracket, it falls between 20 and 30, and you multiply 25 times 4%, and you get to $1. Okay, simple math, we in agreement. You're all wrong. How does graduate income tax work? The first $10 is taxed at 2%. The next $10 is taxed at 3%, and only the $5 in that bracket is taxed at 4%. Much more complicated than most people don't understand graduate income tax. But it's how our federal income tax works. It's how most states tax income. And we're an exception in Colorado because we have a flat rate, so it's easier for us. It's not as complicated. But even Bill Gates would pay 2% on the first $10. In the same way Bill Gates pays the lowest marginal rate, 10%, on his first $17,000 or so. And it's not until you get into his millions where we tax him up in the 30s. Most people have no idea, most Americans have no idea how graduate income tax works. I want to lead that off, just get your brain thinking, prove that you don't know as much as you think you know, maybe. But it's really the difference we teach economics students, the difference between marginal rate and effective rate. Effective rate is how much you pay divided by your income. Marginal rate is what you pay in the last dollar. Last dollar a person they earned paid 4%. Effective rate was only 2.8. Okay, just a little education on taxes. Most other people don't understand the difference between their AGI, adjusted gross income, and their taxable income when they're doing their taxes. But there's all this stuff in the middle that takes your AGI and whittles it down to a lower taxable income, and then it's your taxable income upon which we apply the rates. So when I do my taxes, I sum up all the money I get from teaching at DU, and the money I get earning from the Colorado Fiscal Institute, and the money I get from tips for giving presentations. Tax rate on 0. And then I do my charitable deductions, my mortgage interest, and I deduct my student loans and my low-flow shower head, and I whittle down my AGI into lower taxable income. And then I apply the rates to the federal government and the rates to the state government. The federal tax code recently changed, and it lowered the rates over here, but it also changed all these things in the middle. And so some of those personal exemptions went away, and some of those deductions doubled. So depending on how you did this step, depends on how much more or less taxable income you have this year than last year. And as a whole, the federal government changed taxes, cut taxes, but Colorado actually collected about $300 million more because some of these things in the middle went away and we had slightly higher taxable income to apply our income tax rate. So kind of a weird conundrum paradox. Federal government cut taxes, Colorado actually collect a little bit more. Now let's decompartmentalize all these taxes. We pay income tax to the federal government, we pay income tax to the state of Colorado, then we have fees in Colorado, we have sales taxes, and we have property taxes. Okay? Here's the overall general state budget pie. It's about $32.5 billion. There's a chunk of money we get from the federal government, and we as voters and our elected officials in Colorado don't really have much control over that 29% of the budget. It's money for Medicaid, money for roads, money for higher education. The other chunk of the pie is the cash funds. These are just code for fees. It's all the fees that you pay the state every year. There's a fee on farmers, there's a fee on marijuana growers. A great example for y'all is you have a car, you register your car every year, you pay car registration and licensing fees. Those fees directly go to fund roads and bridges. You can't fee a driver and use it to pay for schools. You can't fee a marijuana grower and use it to pay for roads. That's what the general fund is for. The general fund is 40% of our overall state budget, but we focus most of our attention on the general fund because it's the collective pot of money that we as Coloradans, we throw in all our income tax and all our state sales tax into this giant pool of money. And then our elected officials slice that collective tax dollars. Okay? So about 2/3 comes from income tax, and about 30% comes from state sales tax. Okay? Second activity, in front of you, how well do you know where your tax dollar goes in Colorado? I have several handouts. I've passed out a couple of tables. Don't think I quite have enough. If you'd like to share. I want to get you thinking on where your tax dollar goes. We'll reframe the question. For every dollar you give Colorado in sales tax, for every dollar you give Colorado in income tax, how many cents goes to roads? How many cents of that dollar goes to schools? How many cents funds our courts and our prisons? How many cents goes to colleges? So if you want to take that handout on exercise 1, take about 2 or 3 minutes. Just see how well you know where your tax dollar goes. And the 9 departments I have up here, from corrections and public safety to K-12, our schools, judicial is our courts, should add up to 100 for $1. All right, how we do? What do you think the biggest chunk of our general fund dollars, all the income tax and sales tax we give the state, what's the biggest chunk of our general fund? Healthcare, or education? Public safety? Someone wants to go on roads? I can read the answers for you if you don't jot them down beside your guesses. But schools is the biggest chunk of our general fund state tax dollars. We're saying another way, every dollar you give Colorado, about 36 cents goes to our K-12 education system. Healthcare is the next biggest chunk, about a quarter, now 26% or so goes to Medicaid, mostly Medicaid, which we'll talk about in a bit. Public safety, mostly that's our prisons. We get a little less than our colleges, and about the same amount we give to human services. Public health gets less than 1 penny, half a penny. Our courts get about a nickel. Others about 6 cents, catch-all category. And then transportation is only 1.7. Less than 2 pennies of every dollar we give Colorado in income tax and sales tax goes to our roads. From the general fund, yep, great point. Sprott, yes?
Of the transportation dollars, how many actually go to roads and bridges, and how many of those dollars go to other things?
Yeah, great question. The question is how much of the dollars go to roads and bridges, how much goes to other things like they went multimodal bike paths or transit. I can't tell that off the top of my head. Most of it goes to the highway user tax fund and is portioned out through CDOT. I don't know that off the top of my head, unfortunately. But your point is, your valid point on talking about roads is, yeah, we get a little bit of our general fund dollars to roads. The primary funding source for roads is the gas fee or the gas tax. When you fill a gallon of gas in your car and say it's $2.60 out there, 22 cents of that $2.60 is the gas tax. 22 cents for every gallon you put in your car. That's more than half the funding for roads in the state, is the gas tax. What's tough for funding for roads is that tax has been 22 cents since 1991. If you know anything about inflation, the cost of asphalt, steel, and concrete has doubled since 91. And we give more miles to the gallon. And we're tough on our roads. We leave them outside at night, drive on them. Our primary funding source for roads hasn't been updated for inflation. We used to be above the national average, 22 cents per gallon. It's above the national average of other states in the early 90s. Now we're close to 40. Utah just bumped there to 29 cents and pegged it to inflation. In Colorado, we're stuck in 1991 world for our gas tax. Other surprises. We're going to go in detail each one of these slices in a bit. I want to gauge general surprises of where you're right, where you're wrong. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, what's the effective percentage of taxes on average? In other words, if I make $100, what portion of my adjusted gross or my effective tax rate?
Depends how much you earn. So you make, let's say you make 80,000. I bet, so let's go my AGI example. If you make 80,000 AGI, once you do all the stuff in the middle, charitable reductions and stuff, you probably get down to 45. Depends on how many kids you have, if you have a mortgage, it varies significantly from taxpayer. Let's say on average, it's 70%. Whittle down your AGI by 70%, and then you get 50,000 to then apply 4.63% income tax rate to.
For Colorado.
For Colorado, that's
But
the
if you
state.
take the federal, state,
Yes.
property tax, and fees, there's got to be a number that on average,
I would say
that rate is
25, 26.
total.
Between a range of 20 and 30, I bet, if you look at all total, sales tax, property tax, income tax. But again, it widely varies on your income, your taxable, all your tax stuff in the middle here that I keep on referring to.
Is two-day kindergarten going to change that, or do the districts have to pay for that?
So the question is, we're getting real detail. Can you hold that for 4 slides?
Sure.
It's a great question. You asked about K-12 education, which is a big change the governor made. Well, let's talk about that when we get to schools. Great question. Glad you're anticipating me. Here's how I look at the general fund over time. I like to show this slide just to emphasize that the economy and the general fund fluctuate together. When we hit a recession, people lose their jobs, they have no income, and 0% of zero is zero, as the gentleman indicated earlier. You don't have income, you're not buying stuff, so you're not paying sales tax. So when we hit a recession, the general fund tanks. It fell 13% the last recession. It fell 13% the recession before. But do the math. If you have a 7% rainy day fund, you have a savings account of 7%, and you lose 13% of your revenue, you got to make cuts somewhere. Back during the last recession, this dip here in 2008, 2009, schools really took a run of those cuts. Schools and colleges, and it was also those years that Representative Kennedy showed where the senior homestead was zeroed out. The state didn't have the money to pay for everything because we hit a recession. Now we're 10 years into a boom cycle, and we're kind of due. So it kind of speaks to, if I have more time to talk about the need to have a strong rainy day fund. But again, that's a trade-off. You store money today, it's money that can be used to bond for roads, or money to put to subsidize education, or subsidize tuition. There's a trade-off in everything, right? I insert this slide because normally about 10 minutes into the slide, someone's first question is about pot. So I just hedged that question. Here's your pot slide. The state collected about $260 million from recreational marijuana. Throw that up against the general fund collections. Gross general fund of $12.6 billion. That's 2%. 2%, okay? About $100 million of that probably funnels to our schools. $40 million goes to the BEST program, which puts new roofs and ventilation systems on about a dozen schools every year. Some of that money funnels into rural schools. Some of that money funnels into health and behavioral and counseling and nurses and psychologists in schools. So about $100 million goes to our schools. But state budget for schools is like $7-8 billion. We trickle in $100 million for marijuana. It's not nearly as much as people think. What we've cut from our schools, if you really know school finance, is a negative factor. Basically that means we're about $575 million below inflation since 2009. When we hit that recession in 2008, 2009, we cut $1 billion from our schools. We've made some progress in paying that back, but we're still probably $575 million short of that line, that inflation line. So even if we gave all the money from recreational marijuana to schools, we're still not even cutting that hole in half. Or say it another way, y'all need to smoke about 3 times as much marijuana if we're going to start to solve schools. Trade-offs. Here's the school pie. About 2/3 of the cost of schools comes from the state. It's the overall state pie. Another third comes from locals. So all your income tax and sales tax, the general fund, that pays for 2/3 of schools, and then your property tax pays for the other third, statewide. Okay? And this is the point that dovetails into the homesteading discussion. If you exempt more property from property tax for seniors, that is then translated into less taxable assessed value to then fund schools, to fund fire districts, fund ambulance districts, fund library districts. Again, there's a trade-off. The homestead basically backfills that stuff. The state pays for that tax break that should have went to your schools. The state pays for it. There's a trade-off. This pie looks different depending on which district you're in. Pueblo is about the exact opposite of Aspen. Pueblo doesn't have the property wealth to tax, and a little tiny tax on their homes in Aspen, on ski condos, generates a lot of money. And so Aspen schools are 3/4 locally funded, and then the school finance board that comes in and backfills about 1/4. Pueblo, opposite, can't raise as much, even though their mills are so much higher. So much higher, 27 mills in Pueblo compared to 4.4 in Aspen. But it doesn't generate as much on a $200,000 home as it does a $2 million home. So the state has a system through the school finance formula that backfills and makes up 3/4 of the difference for Pueblo. Okay. There's been discussion. People say, well, if we want to fill the hole in education, why not make Aspen just go to fully locally funded? Why do we even give a quarter out of the state budget to Aspen if they're only at 4.4 mils? It seems like it's punishing Pueblo, who are at such a higher tax rate. Real disparity in school finances, we've cut a bunch of money from this, when we were in the recession in 2009. We cut about 15% of the state contribution to each school district. The response was all these school districts went to mill levy overrides. They asked their local voters and said, let's fund our gymnasium, let's fund our full-day kindergarten, let's fund our art teacher, let's fund extra teachers in the classroom by going to local elections, local overrides. So you always see these on your ballot, these 4 A's, these 4 C's, these 4 D's, 3 A's. They're asking to raise your property taxes a little bit, and all that money stays in your school district. That's all local. And so the districts that have the ability to raise their mills or have the property to tax have a lot more money for their local schools. So you look at override dollars per student is where I think is a big disparity across the state and school finance world. Is Aspen gives $3,400 more per student, and they're paying for it themselves. But Pueblo can't raise, has a hard time passing mill levy overrides. Doesn't have the property tax, doesn't have a casino or a power plant or a bunch of mining property to tax, great businesses to tax, mostly homes. So huge disparity in districts across the state. Which speaks to, if you want to have a more equitable system, maybe have a bigger state pie and then redistribute across the state. Our system is more of, you get what you pay for type of thing, which is fine, and that's your philosophy, but I'm trying to articulate the trade-offs. Yeah?
Chris, is that override more on capital improvements rather than per student?
I lumped them all together. So any bond override that paid for a new gymnasium or money that could have gone to the classroom, in that calculation for that graph, I linked it all together. Yeah, but you're right. It could have been that Steamboat did all that money and just put a new kindergarten room.
But for the most part, that override is capital, not per student.
I would say more than, I don't know. I would say more majority is override, just general operating override dollars. Yeah. Another wrinkle in the school finance world is the shifting from paying more for schools locally and more to the state budget. So we were more than half funded locally for our property taxes, and a lot of it has to do with Gallagher and Tabor, and a lot more of our home was subject to taxes, to those mills. Carol will talk about this after lunch. But what percentage of your home is actually subject to taxation was 21% in the early 80s. Now it's at 7.15%. And the mills for schools have actually fallen significantly. Which means, yeah, we have low property taxes as a percentage of our value, which means the state has to pick up a bigger chunk, which then squeezes everything else in the general fund, squeezes out colleges, squeezes out money available for roads, Medicaid, human services. There's a trade-off between lower property taxes and money available in the general fund because of this linkage, this conduit through which school finance works. We are above the national average in per pupil spending in the early 80s. Now we're well below. Roads, I mentioned this earlier, to the gentleman's question about the different funding sources. Funding sources for roads, we get about $1.5 billion from our gas tax and all the fees. We have pretty high fees, registration fees in the state, but what that's doing is that's compensating for the fact that we haven't adjusted that gas tax since '91. So when you buy a new car, you expect to pay several $100s in fees, but pay lower gas taxes. About $600 million comes from the federal government for our roads. So about 30% from federal government, about 70% comes from fees and gas taxes. Now we do trickle in some dollars from our general fund when we can, and it's mostly during boom years, really good years. During recessions, when we cut schools and cut colleges, we don't have money for roads. And so in the past, the General Assembly has given a fair amount of money to fund roads when it can. Last year it gave $495 million. That would be the 2018 bar, I haven't updated yet. But you can see it fluctuates again with the economy. The real discussion is then, how do we, if you really want to get in the road literature, and solve some of the backfill and projects. CDOT says we have $8-9 billion worth of road construction projects and bridges we could do today if we had the money. Even if you trickle in $500 million today, it doesn't help out CDOT as much as you think, because they need to mortgage that money, sort of. What they need is they should spend $5-6 billion of road construction today and then pay it off over 20 years. In the exact same way, when you buy a home, I didn't have $300,000 to put down, I had $20,000, and I pay a mortgage every month for 30 years and back pay for the home. It's exactly what roads do. It's very similar. But you need a dedicated funding source to then fund $5 billion of road construction today and pay it back over 20 or 30 years. That's why a lot of people try to push sales tax and give a dedicated funding source to roads. So they had a dedicated funding source so we could bond for a bunch of roads today and pay it back with a dedicated funding source. The other camp in the Capitol says, let's just take that 20 years worth of money from the general fund. And that freaks out anyone else, K-12, colleges, because when we hit the next recession, the first thing you have to pay is your debt. If you're on the hook to pay back $200 million every year, next recession really cuts into K-12's budget, or college's budget, or human services budget. Okay? So a little bit of background about how we kind of fund and bond for our roads. Colleges, most states have really gone away from subsidizing tuition. We've kind of actually flipped the ratio. So in the early 90s, it was about 2/3 state funded and 1/3 tuition funded. Now we've flipped it. And we moved from 2/3 tuition funded, 1/3 state. Which, I mean, when you don't have the money for the state budget, you're cutting schools, cutting colleges. Colleges have a second funding source, the tuition, and that's kind of where it's went. More of the price of colleges is on tuition than it used to be. Medicaid. So make a huge distinction between Medicaid and Medicare. Medicare comes in once you're 65 and older. Medicaid, you're talking about, the big distinction is Medicare doesn't cover long-term nursing home care. That's covered by Medicaid. So most people on Medicaid most of the costs come from nursing homes. And most of the individuals on Medicaid are low-income poor kids. But a kid, medical costs are like $2,000 or $3,000 a year on average. Whereas someone in a nursing home, it's close to $40,000 to $50,000. So they're a lot more expensive to cover, although there are a lot less of them. Although most of the enrollment is poor kids. Okay? There's a match. Medicare is covered by the federal government. Medicaid is like 50-50, roughly. So the state kicks in half the cost of Medicaid, long-term disability, nursing care, low-income health care for kids. And then the Obamacare change happened in 2014. And we expanded Medicaid. A bunch of states voted to expand Medicaid. Previously, before Obamacare, if you didn't have a kid, and you were working an $11 an hour job, you didn't qualify for Medicaid. The expansion covered all these extra adults without dependent kids. And so most of these 400 or so thousand people that are on the expansion, they're working adults, but they're working in very low wages. They're working on a lot of those jobs that the demographer mentioned were exploded in numbers in the last decade, but don't pay much. And so the state and federal government pays for their health care through Medicaid. There's been a lot of controversy over this because one camp says, well, we have bad schools, we have bad roads because we're paying for everybody's health care. So let's just cut those working adults off Medicaid, have them buy their own insurance, and free up money for schools and roads. The problem is that doesn't work. 90% of this population, this expansion population, is covered by the federal government, and the other 10%-ish is covered by some other funding source called the hospital provider fee. So the Cliff Notes version is, you could throw 400,000 people off Medicaid, it would free up no dollars in the general fund to pay for schools. Despite the narrative that is about prioritizing versus the size of the population. We've had drastic drop in the amount of uninsured rate, though, since the expansion of Obamacare and the expansion of Medicaid. Close to 16% uninsured in 2011, knocked it below 7%. So about cut it in half because of that expansion population. Last slice of the pie, that's human services. Most people think human services and they immediately go to food stamps and TANF, welfare. TANF and food stamps are actually fully funded by the federal government. That's a federal program. Our state tax dollars only help the administration of those programs. That's $750 million the federal government gives us to give out food stamps, SNAP benefits. It's all federal dollars. It's not our state tax dollars. But our state tax dollars funded human services, you're talking like Meals on Wheels for disabled populations. A lot of it is child welfare services. And a lot of it is drug treatment and rehabilitation programs. So that 8.5% of our state general fund pie, think of it as Meals on Wheels, drug treatment, and child welfare services. It's not food stamps. But a program like this is what we call a non-entitlement. Medicaid is an entitlement. What that means is, if you qualify for Medicaid, we have to pay for it. But if you are a kid in a bad household that needs child rehabilitation services, welfare services, just because you qualify doesn't mean we have the money to pay for it. It's a non-entitlement. Which means then human services is one of those things in the general fund that gets cut when we hit a recession. Colleges get cut, schools get cut, human services tends to get cut. And we have no money available for roads, and we cut the homestead exemption. Those are the big ones that are kind of on the chopping block first when we hit the recession, whereas Medicaid is more protected. Last activity. Chat for the next 3 or 4 minutes in your group. See if you can come up with a collective pie. If you were the state legislature, instead of 120 days, you have 120 seconds. See if you can solve the state budget. How would your table slice the pie? Where would you cut? Where would you expand? Just take a second, chat with your group, and see what comes out.
We have a bigger pie.
Yeah, we have a bigger pie now. You only have the same size pie. You can't have a bigger pie. Remember, Tabor says you can't raise taxes on other people. You got to work with the pie you have. Was that easy? Was that hard? What'd you do? What'd you think? How'd you do as an elected official in Colorado in slicing our general fund pie? That $13 billion you got allocation of. What did your group discuss? I had a lot of people discuss gas taxes. A lot of people discuss affordable housing and doing more for human services and having more of a trust fund for affordable housing. What did your group discuss? What did you fight about? What did you agree about? They didn't want to cut anything, had a hard time adding more because you had to shave somewhere else.
I think you need to increase education a lot.
Okay, what'd you cut there?
And what do I cut?
Yeah.
The extra people that are sitting around not doing their job.
Okay, the way to run the new slice of the pie I didn't put up there, right? Find $1 billion for that. Other thoughts? Yeah.
So some of us wanted to get a president who would have Medicare for all. So get the federal government to pay for Medicare for all, relieving our expenses in Colorado for health care, and shift that into the education fund.
And you were helping with the affordable housing as well. Affordable housing. Other thoughts? There's a great discussion about whether you can raise the gas tax and why that polls so poorly. Why you can't feed a gas tax or adjust the gas tax, modernize the gas tax. Several groups talked about that. Several groups asked if they could have $2. Color over here.
A lot of the problem you see is that if I live out in rural Colorado and somebody says, I'm going to raise your gas tax, he says, well, my road's perfectly satisfactory. Why should I pay more money for people in Denver to have better roads? And quite honestly, I would be in favor. Just if you're a road user, then you pay for the roads like you're doing out on 470. If you know,
Yeah, we're fee-based sort of government, right. It speaks to the fact there is huge disparity between metro, what metro maybe multimodal and transit doesn't work in Dolores County. Great point. How do you collectively come together? How do you solve that issue? It's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. Other thoughts? Yeah. $2. Not $2.
We have a couple ideas, shifting resources given the constraints. One is to reduce incarceration, so lowering public safety and shifting that money into college, community college resources. And the other was reducing our health care by investing more in human services and prevention.
It's more of the catch it on the earlier side, don't fix it later through the other side. Other thoughts? Yes, Nora?
Medicaid costs because of the big pharmaceuticals.
Okay, so go after big pharma, try to lower Medicaid costs, healthcare costs through prescription drugs.
Medicaid cannot, they have to pay the price that the pharmaceuticals give them versus the Veterans Administration negotiating prices.
Okay, so this group is a lot about negotiation through drug prices and prescription drug prices, try to lower healthcare costs, use that for other things. Was this hard? Do you envy Representative Kennedy's job? Did your eyes glaze over? Do you think a lot of people read stuff and can't understand stuff and they don't have the attention span, the eyes glaze over and they say, I wish someone else was dealing with this. I don't want to deal with it. I wish there was a smart group of people that come together every year and actually do things like this and solve these issues. That sounds like a legislature. Colorado, though, where our citizens just saying we vote on all these tax increases, so y'all are the ones that have to be educated and smart enough and nimble enough to talk about these things and not have your eyes glaze over and give up on conversations. And also then talk to your neighbors, friends, your groups, so they understand more of how human services work and how the Gallagher Amendment works and how the gas tax works and how much schools are funded.
The problem, I mean, this is not a bad distribution of funds as percentages. The problem is there's just not enough money that people really don't want to spend more in taxes, but there's an old saying.
So you want to raise your taxes?
Yeah, how much you pay in taxes is a measure of how you value your community.
Interesting. Great point. A trade-off with everything. And higher services comes at the cost of higher taxes. Exactly. One more minute with y'all.
Is there any reason that something like the tax on gas has stayed level for so long?
Yeah, so there's a couple camps. You can't raise taxes by the vote of the people, and a gas tax polls really poorly. That's why you see campaigns the last several years, they went to a sales tax. Sales tax tends to poll better. Gas tax, you'd still get about a quarter from out-of-staters from the gas tax. But they're tourists coming to our state and they're driving cars. There are actually a lot of freight movers too, like FedEx. FedEx would pay a big chunk, out-of-staters would pay a big chunk of gas tax. Sales tax, similar. We would tax tourists a little more than a quarter from sales. But income tax would be all of us, would be everyone in Colorado pays 100%. Property tax the same way. So, but for some reason gas tax polls really poorly. There's one camp that argues lawyery, that maybe it's a fee. Legislators can raise fees. Is gas tax a fee? Is a fee a tax? I mean, that's a great lawyer question. Save that for Carol. Pick Carol's brain later. Pick that to Carol in the afternoon. Yeah, no, one more question. I wanted to circle back to the great question on full-day kindergarten. So Governor Paul's made a huge campaign promise to do full-day kindergarten. Right now in the school finance formula, a kindergarten student is only, I think, 5/8 worth of funding for schools. So a second grader gets $7,000 through the school finance formula. A kindergartner only gets 5/8 of that $7,000.
Even with all-day kindergarten?
No, that's before, yeah, prior to the change in all-day kindergarten. But Polls did, and Bill said, we're going to move that to 1. Kindergartner's worth a second grader's worth a senior. Okay? I think they estimated that costs 170, 200-ish.
So they're taken away from the other grades.
No, not necessarily. The money goes to the school district and they have fungibility to do what they want. That's replaced about $100 million of tuition. A lot of folders in the Douglas counties, they charge for kindergarten, and now they can't charge. But that's $300 now goes to the pocket of that family that was paying expensive for kindergarten. That's now being paid by a state budget. So it's dangerous to say we've solved the K-12 issue. That education advocates will say full-day kindergarten didn't solve much of anything. It's maybe $100 million more to an $8 billion pie. We're still ranked really poorly on per pupil funding. But it has freed up a bunch of spots for kindergarten, pre-K, some preschool slots, and it's made a huge difference in the pocketbooks of people who are paying out of pocket, and makes a huge difference in some of the rural districts that didn't already have, the 20% or so that didn't already have full-day K. So, mediocre, moderate win, but not nearly as much as I think people think it was.
Well, I read an article that the school districts are paying.
That they could, some school districts are already on full-day kindergarten. They'll get more through the school finance formula because the 5/8 goes to 1. But then they might have lost all the tuition money they were charging. So there could be some districts that are netting less. Yes, it all depends on what one of the 178 districts you're in. It's not. I don't believe so. No, they have a choice. Yeah, great question. It's not mandatory. It's a promotion for my hour-long school finance lecture. I'll send you details.
Thank you, Chris.